Hello and welcome to On the Soul's Terms. I'm your host, Chris Skidmore. And today we're going to take a journey into the 8th house. I recorded this episode last night close to midnight. To be honest, I'd already attempted to record the episode 4 times before starting all over again. It felt particularly necessary with the 8th not to talk about the house, but to talk from it. That's why it felt important to speak into it from the night world. It's the kind of episode that ends up feeling like a guided meditation, a way to go gently into places we might have a strongly ambivalent relationship with. And by that I mean we want to go there and we really don't want to go there. So this is my disclaimer for this episode. If you're not really in the space right now to explore the themes of the underworld, you might want to pause here and come back when you have a little time. Perhaps when you have a journal in front of you and no one to disturb you for the next hour or so. Before we begin, I'd like to address the most common question we receive as astrologers about the houses, and that is, what does it mean if a house is empty? Given that each of these houses are such central elements of reality itself, I can understand the terror that sometimes comes over people when they see an empty house, or sometimes the humor at imagining a part of my life that just isn't there. So I'd like to answer the question here so it's answered somewhere. Firstly, on the technical level, no house is actually empty. The first thing to look for in a house is the sign on the cusp. That's the symbol written on the door of the house. To find that cusp, look at the line that separates the house from the house before. This is the doorway. For example, the cusp of the 8th is the line between the 7th and 8th. In astrology, each sign has a ruler. For example, the ruler of Aries is Mars, and the ruler of Taurus is Venus, and we can keep going along like that. The ruler of the sign on the cusp is the ruler of that house. And where that ruler is will tell you a lot about that house, as well as the aspects that that ruler makes to other planets and bodies. With this in mind, no house is in fact empty. Every house has its story. On the less technical level, there's an invitation on this podcast to imagine these arenas of life without your chart, to feel into these places of reality and get your own current sense of them in this moment. It's something I encourage, especially in the 8th house, as it's a water house, and therefore it's best approached with your feeling sense rather than with the mind. My sense of the astrology chart is that it's a guide akin to Hermes. It's an excellent guide to the many realms of the soul. But it's also a trickster and can confuse you just as easily as it can bring you clarity. When we look at Hermes with bewilderment and say, "Hey, why did you do that?" he often winks back at us with a wry smile and shrugs his shoulders. He didn't ask you to follow him, although we know he's the best guide we've got. Well, with all of that out of the way, I think we're ready to enter the 8th house together. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and just to say a special thanks to all the listeners and those who have chosen to support the show through Patreon. It means a lot to me to receive that support and helps keep this work free from advertising and noise. Okay, away we go. See you on the other side. Thanks for joining us today. And today, we're going to make a journey into the 8th house, the house associated with the underworld, house of sex, death, other people's money, other people's resources, shared resources, the occult world, the hidden realm. And in a way, as I think to speak on this, I get the sense that, like the ancient mysteries, I can't say too much. In the ancient world, in the Eleusinian mysteries, the one great rule was everybody that went through it was sworn to secrecy. And most of the names we know from the ancient world did go through it. The mysteries themselves lasted well into the 6th century, even past Christianity. It was so special and so needed and so central to a living, breathing culture that there was a relationship with this world, with this hidden realm, with the underworld, with death, with fear, with everything that we don't want to look at. It was so essential, and everybody felt it was so essential that it made it even past monotheism coming into its rule, at least for a couple of centuries anyway. And so I'm given the task today to speak of a house in which everything in that house is sworn to secrecy. How will we do that? Let's find out. So we've been in the 7th house. We've made it all the way around from the first, through the first 6 houses. We made it above the descendant into the upper world, into the 7th. And the 7th was the first oppositional house. So from the 7th, we could see the first, and we were pondering in there the I am and the I am not, and the element of the persona and the shadow of the persona, the things we don't identify with showing up in this 7th house. And we had a good look around in there. And now it's time to leave that house and wander back off into the path. And we notice the path is heading off into a darker part of the forest. And as we walk along in this dark part of the forest, we come to an edge, we come to a precipice, and we realize that the way to get to the 8th house is that we're going to have to go down what the ancient Greeks called the Katabasis. We are going to have to plunge downward. And so as we find ourselves on this edge, maybe we think, I'm not so sure I want to go down there. It looks a little bit scary and a little bit steep, and I don't really know what might happen down there. And as we stare down, we see it almost like a chasm opening up. And into that chasm, our deepest, darkest fears begin to stare back at us, look back at us. And maybe we think, no, I think I'll go back, retrace my steps, go back to the 7th house, go in there, whatever contracts I've made in that 7th house, I think I'll tear them up, and then go back in the 6th house where it'll just be me and my tasks and my chores, taking care of myself. It sounds a lot easier to me. But of course, we're on a journey through the houses, and that means going through every house, including going through this house, the 8th. And so we stand on this precipice and we look down into that chasm. On a recent trip to Greece, I went to a temple dedicated to Hades and Persephone, and it was where 3 rivers to the underworld meet. The place is still there, of course. On top of it is a church that was built much later. But the actual underground temple is still there. And this temple dedicated to Hades and Persephone is called the Necromanteion. So it is a temple for the dead. And it's a place where participants in the rituals there would get in touch with the dead and look to them for prophecy, look to them for help, look to the dead essentially as oracles. So this was like an oracle site, but the oracles themselves were the dead. There's a very tiny hole that you could go down, and only one person could go down at a time, single file, as is the case with the 8th house, at least when it comes to the process of death. And so I walked down, and my friend walked down behind me, and we came into this room where you could see evidence of a river that was running through this dark room, and we imagined what it would be like for a river to actually be running through there, and walked up to the end. And at the end, people had made offerings of coins. They put these coins in the cracks in the wall. And it was a very dark and still place, and no one really visits this particular temple, or at least on that day there were very, very few people. So we had some time just to be down there by ourselves and feel the quiet of this space. And then I realized there was a switch there and we could turn the lights off. And then turning the lights off and being in that space, we could really feel what it must have been like for the ancients. As you stare towards the edge of this tunnel, you can almost feel something is also staring back at you, something is participating with you. And it felt like the longer that you stay there, the longer that you stare into that great chasm, that great abyss, the more you will receive feedback from that abyss. And who is that that's giving you feedback? Is that the dead? Is that the ancestors? Is that the oracle of this place? Imagining when priests and priestesses were still very much there in this temple. It's apparently from the 4th century BCE. It was really quite the hub, so people would come there. But what are people doing really? They're connecting with ancestors, but they're connecting with their ancestors not necessarily just to see that they're okay and see that they're doing, how are you doing, and checking in on them, but actually asking them for prophecy, asking them for advice on how to live their life well, connecting to them in this way, coming to them with questions. And this feels very 8th house to me, because after all, the 8th house would be the house of mediumship, of connecting with the dead, connecting with that realm, the underworld, connecting with ultimately the occult. And the occult is a word that has picked up many things along the years, but occult ultimately simply means that which can't be seen, the hidden realms, that can't be sensed through the 5 senses. So in order to get in touch with that realm, we need to employ other senses, and that's really what the 8th house is all about. So let's come back up to our precipice and have a look for yourself. Is there a way down, given that you can't go back to the 7th? You're already in the podcast, you're already in the episode, so we're going into the 8th. We can't go back to the 7th. Have a look in your particular chasm, in your particular slope, in your particular hole here. How are you going to make your descent? How are you going to get down to this 8th house? Maybe in order to get down, we could take a few hints from mythic figures who've also made the journey. So who have we got that can help us with this? Well, of course, Persephone. Now, Persephone's way down was to pull up a flower and to pull this chasm towards herself and then be taken by the Lord of the Underworld, Hades or Pluto, snatched from her place and taken down. That's one way. Another way is to go about 1,000 years or so before and follow the Mesopotamian myth of Inanna. And Inanna took off 7 layers of jewelry, starting with her crown and moving down the chakra system, taking off layer after layer. And for Inanna, rather than being snatched and taken, she simply heard the call of the underworld and began to make the journey. So that's another way. Take off the things that are in your persona of this everyday world, this surface world, and begin to take the descent, to begin to take the journey. I think I'd rather take Inanna's path than Persephone's, but that's what happens over time. Rather than go there willingly, because the culture is supporting that already by the time Persephone's myth is being told, it's something we have to be taken to. We have to be snatched. Now, who else goes down there? Well, of course, there's our great hero Hercules. He goes down there. And how does he get down there? Well, he has to go through the mysteries, in fact. He has to go first to Eleusis and go through the mysteries himself. How much Hercules actually learns in the mysteries, not entirely sure. It seems like that was one of the great challenges of Hercules' life, really learning his lessons. But he does go through the mysteries and he is granted the right to actually go down into the underworld. But he realizes when he's down there that his weapons do not work. He's swinging his club wildly, but the figures that he sees down there are phantoms. So it seems that once he's down there, his regular hero work isn't going to really do the job anymore. Now, who else? Well, we also, of course, have Orpheus. Orpheus on his wedding day, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, loses his bride, who's bitten by the viper, and she is then carried down to the underworld. And he's so devastated that he begins to play on the lyre, and Orpheus is a son of one of the muses, and so we can only imagine the kind of music that he's capable of playing on the lyre, and it's so moving to everybody that he's able to soften everybody that would be the guardians. That includes Cerberus, the three-headed dog, the ferryman Charon, and even Hades and Persephone themselves. He's able to soothe and calm everybody that is there and gently make his way down and make his way back using his music. So that's another way. Maybe pouring our soul into our song is a way down there. So there's a couple of hints of how some of these figures go down to the underworld. But maybe what you really need is a guide. And there are a few guides, but the great guide of the ancient world is Hermes. Hermes is given access to all the different realms, and so he would be a great guide to take you down there and to get you across any barriers, and also to tell a few stories along the way and sing a couple of songs and keep the merriment going and keep the life force running. Of course, you could also get Hecate, who is known for helping those who are in a deep, dark process and helping them get to where they need to go, helping them to meet those underworld challenges as well. So that should give us some hints, but perhaps you're able now to slowly make this gentle descent. And it's allowed to be gentle today because by pressing play on an episode that says the 8th house, like Inanna, you've heard the call and you've gone willingly. And so down we go. It's a little bit here like the Asclepian temples, where next to the Abaton, which is the sleeping chamber, the healing chamber, where we would go to sleep amongst non-venomous snakes who'd be slithering around. Just next to that is a labyrinth, and we walk down through this labyrinth almost to get out of our everyday minds and enter this underworld mind. So we can walk that labyrinth and we can go down, but either way, we gently and slowly make our way down. I'm now thinking about Psyche when she was first told that she was marrying this beast, this serpent, this dragon. Of course, the Pythia, who speaks with a forked tongue, had given her mother and father the news that she would be married, betrothed to one who flies through the air, causing all sorts of trouble for mankind, even for the gods, and who is winged and carries fire. Of course, that does sound like a serpent, that does sound like a dragon, but the other side of the tongue of the Pythia was also referring to Eros himself. And so Psyche's way of getting down to that palace is to stand up on that precipice, much like the one we have now, and wait for the Zephyr, the gentle west wind, to come and carry her down to this place that she was told to fear. She was told that it would be a very scary place, but once she gets there, it's actually quite beautiful. And it's there that she meets Eros, but Eros is not visible to her. And in some ways, Eros is not visible to any of us. We meet Eros in the night world. Eros is something that comes into us and comes through us. Of course, Eros is simply life force and the energy of life, the energy of creation itself. And in this story, Psyche meets Eros in the dark. They spend their nights together. So only in the night world is she able to interact with him, and she's not able to see him in the day world. It's much like that in the 8th house. In the 8th house, we can interact with Eros, but in the day world, it's a different game. There's different rules in the day world. We need the night world rules in order to really interact with Eros, the hidden god, the winged one. And it is Eros that we'll meet here when it comes to one-to-one relationships. If it's gone through the 5th house of that romance, that beginning phase, into the 6th house of becoming a day-to-day reality where the rhythms and the routines are set, then into the 7th house of marriage or coming together into some kind of contractual relationship, and then into the 8th house of true intimacy. And as Brian Clark always likes to tell us, intimacy is into you I see, into me you see. What does he say, Brian? He says, into me you see. This is the realm where we can really look, where we can, because of that darkness, because we're not in the everyday world, because we've entered this other reality, we're able to truly see another human being, and that other human being is able to truly see us. And as beautiful as that sounds, it's not just the beautiful parts that we see in this 8th house. It's all of our struggles, all of our demons, all of our worst parts suddenly laid bare in front of another person. No wonder, as the oracle says, he's the one who strikes fear into the hearts of men. Of course, most of us are, in the words of the Eagles, looking for a lover that won't blow my cover. But in the 8th house, that is not possible. In the 8th house, once we've gone there, our cover is blown. In fact, that's what happens in the 8th house. In the 8th house, our persona is stripped like the snake. The skin is stripped bare, and we are exposed. We're exposed here. And that's what makes it such a powerful and potent house, a house of such great mysteries. When we come in touch with another person in that way, we're coming in touch with ourselves in that way. That's why there's such a vulnerability in this house, and such an opportunity for openness, and such an opportunity to bear ourselves. And then, of course, sometimes those demons, they can just take over, as so often happens in intimate relationships. The two that were there in the 7th house, these two very rational air house adults that could see each other and sign contracts and understand exactly what they were signing up for, suddenly have been sucked into this chasm, into the underworld, and all hell has broken loose. And what do we do then? What do we do then? We can try to scramble back up that hill, scramble back up the chasm and make our way to the 7th, undo all those, try to get back to the 6th. Or the other option is to be here in this place, be here in this realm, a realm that the modern world has decided to call hell and decided to demonize. But the ancient world saw as the ultimate place to go through these mysteries, the ultimate place to visit, the ultimate place to spend 9 days with priests and priestesses and a whole range of people going through a whole range of experiences, just to face our deepest, darkest fears, just to face what really gets in the way of us being truly alive. And so in these ancient mysteries, we're asked to face our death. We're asked to come face to face with our mortality, with the reality that we're going to die someday. Something that the modern world spends all these resources in trying to make us forget about, trying to fill our eyes with flashing lights. And so we might just be hypnotized into the thinking that, well, that could never happen to me, even though we all know that that's inevitable, even though we all know that. Life is not set up for us to look at that. Life is set up for us to look forward, to progress, to keep on keeping on. But just in this realm and just in this place is where we get to actually be with that, actually look at that, actually feel that, actually experience our own mortality. And while we're facing that, we get to face everything else that we're really, truly afraid of. You know, as I said, in the ancient world, everybody was sworn to secrecy, but what they did say is that once they came back, they felt more alive having faced their death. that they felt more alive having faced their death. Or we could say more alive, more eros, more life force, having faced everything that is in the way, all of our fears, all of our blocks, all of our limits, all of our traumas, all of our frozen parts. Actually going with the help of the priests and the priestesses to spend time with that, to actually spend time with that. When I was in Eleusis, and I was, or Elefsina as it's called today, and I was reading about it there, it was quite common for even the slave class of ancient Greece to go through the mysteries, as long as the master would pay the donkey or the goat or whatever the sacrifice was. And often that's what did happen because it was that cherished. It was understood across the board, no matter where you stood in society, that it was something that everybody should experience. And it was often paid for by the upper class to the less fortunate materially in that culture. So having made our way down this chasm and now looking at your hidden house, this 8th house, what do you see? If you know your astrology, maybe you can have a sense of the cusp between the 7th and 8th, and that might be written on the door, if this even has a door. Maybe it's a cave, I'm not sure. And as you wander around inside, you may see the planets in this house, or you might see the ruler of this house, which is the ruler of whatever's on the cusps there. You might see aspects to that ruler or aspects to what's in this house. And it may be the kind of house that you want to spend a fair bit of time in, and especially looking around. And, you may not be able to see so well in here, so you might have to use your other senses, use your hands to feel around. What's hidden in this house? What are the things that you don't want to talk about? What are the things that your culture doesn't want to talk about? What are the things that your family doesn't want to talk about? All of the things we don't want to talk about become taboo, and everything taboo becomes lodged inside of this house. And if only we could have a good look around, we might be able to free them up. We might be able to free up our life force. We might be able to free up even the parts of us that have been spent repressing, suppressing, pushing these things down and pushing these things away, burying them, getting the shovels out and burying them. Maybe in this cave or house, you might find a shovel and you might start digging a few things up and finding what is around here. Hang on a second, because there might be old bones and there might be old remains and there might be all sorts of things, but there could also be treasures down here, sunken treasures, things that I hid down here that I completely forgot about. Maybe even gifts that I have that I've been not really wanting to look at because they kind of scare me. So rather than own those gifts, maybe I put them here in the 8th house. I didn't really want to be that. So maybe other people can do that. Or maybe my partner can do that, but not me. Not me. And so that might be the hidden treasures down here. We might have to just have a good look around, and we might have to, just make sure that we're not rushing through this house. It might even be worth sitting inside of this house and getting really quiet and seeing if other senses can come forward. If you're not really seeing anything, hearing anything, smelling anything, tasting anything, touching anything, then what else is there? Is there a sense of just knowing where certain things are? Is there a sense of just knowing elements of the self that have been hidden that could be really useful in your life? It's in this house that we learn to pay attention to the hidden realm all around us. Like, what is the tone? What is the feeling sense, the felt sense of the environment that we're in? What was the felt sense of the environment that we grew up in? Maybe that was a training ground for us. And we all know about this, but we don't really give it language necessarily. Like, when you walk into a room and you just feel something, and that could be a really positive thing. You might feel love and excitement walking into a room, or you might feel peace walking into a room. But you could also walk into a room and feel like there's some kind of nasty vibration there and it doesn't feel good. Or maybe you walk into a room and you suddenly lose all your energy. Or maybe you walk into a room and you suddenly feel lots of energy. What is that? The 8th house knows what that is. That's this hidden realm, this hidden feeling realm. And it's around us all the time. And in the 8th house, we get to really attune to that and really trust that. In a sense, in the 8th house, we get to really attune and trust also our instincts again. Our instincts that have been paved over by our civilized self and our minds and all of the information that we have and all of the understandings that we have and all of the intellects that we have. It's in the 8th house that we're asked to let go of all of those things. Like Medusa, we're asked to lose our heads and come back to our bodies and to know something. What is it that we know? What is it that we know? And maybe that's the deepest gold that is buried inside of this house, the thing that we just know. So if you have some space, you might want to hit pause here and just spend some time, close your eyes, get into a quiet little zone, feeling with your whole soul what is in this house. Maybe even your astrological chart is too much information. Maybe we don't even need to think about your astrological chart or what's in there or what's on the cusp and all that kind of stuff. That may just disconnect you from this house. So maybe just feeling it. You maybe can go back to what it was like. What's your earliest memory and what's the feeling associated with that? Or what was it like in your childhood home or subsequent childhood or adolescent homes? What was it like at the school you were at? What was it like in your friendship group? What was it like when you grew up a little bit? What was it like in your first relationship? What was the feeling of all of that? And that may tell us a lot about your own 8th house. And there may be a gentle way here to do some very, very gentle excavation and releasing. In the 1920s and 30s, there was a conversation that went on between Freud and Wilhelm Reich, where Reich had disagreed with the hypothesis that Freud had put forward. And Freud put forward the hypothesis that there was Eros, which is life force, and Thanatos, which is like the death wish. And there was a tension between these two inside every human being. And Reich made it a point to argue vehemently for years and years that this is not the case. And instead there's Eros, and then the absence of Eros or the stopping of the flow of Eros. But Eros itself does not have this opposite. Eros is life force and it's always wanting to come forward and it's always wanting to create and to make love and to be alive. But it gets thwarted. And Reich suggested that the main place that it gets thwarted is in society itself and society's rules that push it down and make it distorted and make it not be able to do what it needs to do, which Freud argued against. He sees it a different way. He sees that there's an inherent part of the human being that moves itself towards death and decay, an inherent part of the human being, the opposite part that moves itself towards life. It was an interesting argument, and it's curious where you would sit on that. For me, it's a very important argument because there's a statement in what Reich is saying that is very valuable for this 8th house. If Reich is right, it means that our life force is always willing and always wanting to come forward, but we may need to go down into this house to remove some of the things that get in the way, remove some of those blocks, remove some of those places where we get into extreme states of fear and anxiety, and we get into deep trouble with ourselves, and we thwart our life force, our Eros, we distort our Eros, and it turns ugly and it gets into bad places. And so maybe that's the ultimate hidden treasure of this house. Maybe it's Eros itself, in the same way that Psyche meets Eros in the night world. Maybe we meet Eros here, our life force, our lust for life, our desire to be in this world. We meet it down here, oddly enough, paradoxically enough, in the realm of death. And so, again, I invite you to have a good look around. I'm sure you'll see things that I have not mentioned here. And some of these things I cannot mention because it is the mystery realm. It is the realm of the mysteries themselves. And so have some time here, spend some time, do what you need to do in this house, knowing that the next house is Of course, after the 8th is the 9th, and that's really the house of the rebirth. It's like once we come out, if we're willing to go all the way through this 8th house, we come into the 9th house. And this, again, in the mysteries, many of the names that we know from the ancient world, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, and all of these characters, they went through these mysteries and they found that when they came out, they had a deeper understanding of life itself. By going all the way down into this place, they were able to come up and see things far more clearly. And that's the 9th house, the house of the mind of God, in a sense, the house of our higher mind, our higher understanding. It's where we have higher learning. It's where we go overseas traveling and discovering other cultures, discovering other people, and expanding our minds, and it's expanding our horizons happens in the 9th. But the 9th doesn't happen as thoroughly or as well unless we have gone through the 8th. So thank you for joining me here on the Soul's Terms on this deep, dark 8th house episode. I would say I hope you've enjoyed it, but it's not necessarily about enjoying a house like this. It's about inhabiting and taking deep breaths and slowing down, especially as this house is opposite the 2nd. And the 2nd house is our resources. And we really need to look at our resources in order to go into this deep, dark house of the 8th. The 8th house, where we discover down here that everything is shared, that there's not really such a thing, such a directly obvious thing as mine and then yours and then ours. It's like everything is ours. The implications on that are on our planet itself, and our understanding of the 8th house on a collective level would help us enormously to see that whatever you do to all of us, including yourself. There's no way to cause damage to this earth without causing it directly to yourself. And that's what we discover in the mysteries. That's what we discover in the occult realm. And when we come back from the 8th, we try to share that message in the 9th. Well, thank you for joining me down here in this deep house, this deep chasm. I hope you found your house down here, or whatever it might be. It might be that cave, or it might be that hut. It may even be somewhere down here. There may be a dark woods in which there's the witch's hut that you found down here. Whatever it is, I hope you get a good, strong sense impression of it, and remember that this is a place that you can come back to anytime. You don't need the priest or the shaman to come here. You can come here anytime. You might find it to be the place of the deepest resources, something very, very quiet and still, kind of like an Asclepian dream chamber, where you can come back to yourself, where you can remember all those dismembered parts, where all of your fractured selves can sit together and have a cup of tea and acknowledge each other and come back to that feeling of being all in it together. I'm looking forward to the next few episodes, which will still be on this 8th house, and then eventually we will make our way all the way up into the 9th house and have that great celebration of having made it through a house like this. I appreciate you listening in. I hope this has been valuable for you, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Soul's Terms. Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.